There's always a moment when the truth changes the course of our world. For some it breaks them, for others it's the long path to forgiveness and a new course, but for Ciara Hart, it was the end of her life. Ciara had always believed in love as a quick flame, a speedy march toward a shared future, a race of intimacy and trust. She was lively, passionate, and took everything she wanted from life. What will she do when she discovers that all she's ever known about her amazing fiancé was built on lies and deceit? Ciara met Jamal Johnson when she was just beginning to understand the difference between passion and devotion, and he seemed the reflection of her idea of a perfect man. He was everything she thought she wanted in a partner: intelligent, understanding, caring, with a sense of purpose. He was a professor, and that in itself carried a kind of prominence and relevance in her mind. The way he spoke, the way his words carried authority, even in casual conversation, had captivated her from the start. Ciara admired Jamal's discipline, his commitment to his studies, to his career. But more than that, he was different from the men she had known. Reserved, almost to the point of being mysterious. She respected his boundaries, even if they puzzled her at times. Their courtship was slow, perhaps too slow. He often resisted her attempts to get closer, to become intimate, to cross certain lines that seemed natural for a couple so in love. But he always had an excuse, some righteous and admirable reason that kept him from the physical intimacy that most of her past relationships had rushed into. He called it purity, his desire to preserve their connection, to keep their bond holy before marriage. Clara, a romantic at heart, found herself charmed by his restraint. It felt like something rare, something sacred. She looked forward to the night of their marriage with an anticipation she couldn't quite articulate, imagining how it would feel to finally close that gap between them. She wondered what it would be like, to finally experience him in the way she had only dreamed. Jamal's life had never been what he wanted it to be. He was born into a humble family, but that wasn't his biggest pain in life. Jamal was different. He knew it right from preschool. The boys in the dormitory would never let him forget the one thing that made him feel different. They made jokes at him, mocked him, belittled him. As the years passed, Jamal felt broken and vulnerable about the one thing he could never change. He had grown up enduring whispers, taunts, and the teasing that plagued him well into his teenage years. The problem was simple, but to Jamal, it was the one thing that defined him. The boys at the dorm would call him names, point and laugh, and he could never escape their cruel words. It wasn't just the physicality of it, though, it was the constant reminder that he was less than, that he would never measure up in the eyes of those around him. The ridicule stung deeper than he could admit, leaving scars that would shape his relationships for years to come. He tried everything he saw online, but nothing worked. And finally, Jamal resigned to fate. As he grew older, Jamal turned inward. He focused on his studies, throwing himself into his work, finding solace in the intellectual pursuits that had always come naturally to him. He spent years building a career, becoming a respected professor in his field. But his success only served to mask the deep-seated insecurity he still carried. He had learned to avoid relationships, to push people away before they could get too close. He couldn't bear the thought of anyone discovering his secret, the one thing that could never be fixed. No matter how much he tried. His success and wealth were distractions. Distractions from the loneliness that followed him, from the constant fear of exposure. He would rather remain distant, focusing on his career, than face the reality of what he was hiding. But that was all before he met Ciara Hart. Ciara, on the other hand, came from a different world. She had been in relationships before, some more meaningful than others, but she had always believed in love and intimacy. She was a romantic, someone who believed in soulmates and the magic of connection. She was drawn to Jamal's mystique, his aloofness, the way he seemed to resist the world while still somehow being a part of it. She had heard his deceptive reasons for not wanting to rush into anything physical, and she respected them. After all, it wasn't every day that a man would hold to such principles. She found herself enchanted by his purity of intention, believing that it spoke to the strength of his character. She admired him for keeping their bond untainted, for wanting to preserve it until the time was right. But there were moments, quiet moments when they were alone, that Ciara couldn't help but wonder. Why did he avoid touch so often? Why did he seem to pull away when their closeness grew too intense? She never questioned his love for her, but there was always a part of her that felt a nagging emptiness. Was it possible that there was more to his hesitation than he was letting on? It was the night of their wedding that the unthinkable finally happened. After 2 years, Jamal had decided Ciara was the one for him. He assumed she would understand him. That she loved him. That night, Ciara was filled with excitement, eager for the night to unfold in the way she had always imagined. Their friends and family had congratulated them and left the newlyweds for their first night. As they entered the luxurious suite, Ciara was getting jittery. She couldn't wait to get into bed with Jamal. She poured herself a glass of champagne and sat down on the couch, expecting Jamal to join her. However, Jamal seemed hesitant, stalling and making excuses. "Let's just enjoy the champagne for a bit," he said, pouring himself a glass. "We can celebrate our special night later." Ciara was confused, she felt a bit puzzled. She couldn't understand why Jamal was still being so hesitant. She had expected him to be eager to consummate their marriage. A glass passed and then 2, and 3, and before she knew it, they were on their 4th glass. Ciara started to feel a bit suspicious. Was Jamal trying to get her drunk? She pushed the thought aside, thinking that she was just being paranoid. After the 6th glass of champagne, Ciara finally stood up, her eyes locked on Jamal's. "I want to get into bed with you," she said, her voice firm but playful. Jamal hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "It's getting late," he said. "Maybe we should wait until tomorrow." Ciara's eyes narrowed. She wasn't going to let Jamal stall any longer. He looked a little shy, but she didn't mind getting him in the mood. With a mischievous grin, she jumped up and pulled Jamal's bathrobe off, leaving him completely bare to her gaze. And that's when she saw it. His penis. The truth crashed over her like a wave, leaving her breathless. Jamal's body, the one she had idealized for so long, was not what she had expected. It was not just the physical aspect, but the deep sense of betrayal that came with it. She had trusted him, believed in his promises, and now she felt the sting of his deception. In that moment, Clara's world shattered. She knew she had to confront him, had to understand why he had hidden this from her. "Jamal, why is your penis so small?" Jamal looked away. His face red with disgrace. He threw on his bathrobe and said that he was going to the patio to have a drink. But Ciara refused to go with him. She was shocked, she felt betrayed. Furious, she asked him if this was why he had insisted that they stay without sexual intimacy throughout their entire courtship. Jamal lied that it had nothing to do with his body, that he simply wanted to respect her and wanted to keep his own dignity. But Ciara knew he was lying. It dawned on her that Jamal had been hiding this truth selfishly all along. When she pressed, insisting on the truth and the reason for his deceit, Jamal's reaction was nothing like what she had anticipated. The quiet man she had loved, the one she thought would cherish her above all else, turned violent in a flash of rage. That was when Ciara realized that she couldn't do this anymore. She could not live with such a man. "I want a divorce," Ciara said. Jamal froze, looking at her in shock. "I cannot marry you, Jamal, I want a divorce." Ciara insisted. In a fit of rage and shame, Jamal lashed out at Ciara, telling her that she could never divorce him, that their marriage was for better or worse. He accused her of being too sexual and loose, and that's why she was already comparing him with others. He taunted her about her supposed promiscuity and multiple partners. Ciara was taken aback by Jamal's outburst, and she realized that she had made a terrible mistake in marrying him. But Ciara refused to be manipulated by him. She knew that this had nothing to do with righteousness or preserving himself for his wife, He did this to hide his own shame and for his own selfish reasons. Marriage is for better or for worse, Ciara, Jamal insisted. You can't just divorce me because things got rough. You made a commitment to me, and you need to stick to it. But Ciara said that she could never be stuck in a loveless marriage with him. To Ciara, this was not just about hiding who he was, it was about deceiving her and making her feel like a fool. She decided that a man like Jamal, who could afford to deceive her for 2 years, could not be trusted. As the argument escalated, Jamal's words became more and more deadly. He told Ciara that she was lucky to have him, that he was a professor and a respected member of society. We can talk about this, my size has nothing to do with our marriage. You must stay, he argued. But Ciara refused to listen to him, her mind was already made up. She began to throw her things into her bag, threatening to get out of the honeymoon suite because she couldn't spend the night with him. Jamal watched, his eyes filled with shame. A secret that he had buried for the past 35 years was hunting him, and in the most humiliating manner. He had money, he had houses scattered all over the city, he had a job that many would die to get. And yet the one thing that he felt he lacked was the one thing that would cost him his happily ever after. You can't leave me, Ciara, he said coldly. I will speak with my lawyer tomorrow, she will serve you the divorce papers, Ciara replied sharply and shoved her last dress into the traveling bag, throwing it on the bed as she began to pack up her shoes. It was in that moment that Jamal knew he had to do something. All his life he had protected his image. He had always appeared like the respected professor. He had built his wealth and made sure that no one knew his secret. But Ciara had found out and slapped him right across his face with the glaring truth that no woman would ever accept him. This was his weakness, and years of being mocked by his mates and anyone who saw him had taught him that he was not enough, a wrong notion and perception that he had grown up with. And now his secret and lies had caused him the one woman that loved him with all her heart. While Ciara was getting her things ready to leave, Jamal knew he could not let her tell the others what she had seen. He still lived with the trauma of the mockery he had faced in high school, and he could never bring himself to face such shame and humiliation again. Ciara was cheerful and lively, she would certainly mention to her friends why she had divorced him. She was not the type to keep a secret, and one way or the other the world would know his truth. Jamal realized in that moment of clarity he could never let that happen. In a desperate bid to silence her, Jamal attacked Ciara. He picked up his belt from the bed and without thinking wrapped it around her neck. Ciara tried to struggle, but it was too late. She was trapped in his hold before she realized what he was trying to do. She kicked and screamed and fought against his hold, but he was far stronger than her petite frame. The leather went tight around her neck, cutting off her airflow as her face turned purple and she struggled to breathe. Jamal was so consumed in anger and shame that he did not know when to stop. He had a singular purpose, and that was to keep her silent. To make sure she never told another soul what she had seen. To protect his secret. Jamal did not let go until her body laid motionless on the bed. That was when he pulled away, shaking in fear and realization. He had just killed his newlywed bride. He was a murderer. Jamal did not just flee the crime scene like many would expect. He went into tiny details of cleaning up his fingerprint as best as he could. He dragged the body into the bathroom and submerged high in water, washing every inch of her skin before dragging her to the backyard where he buried her in a shallow grave. Then Professor Jamal Johnson cleared up the house as best as he could, making sure everything was in place before he left the honeymoon suite. For many weeks the police were not aware of what had happened in the honeymoon suite that fateful night. Ciara's friends and family were still yet to see her, but many assumed that she was having the honeymoon of her dream. Jamal had turned off her phone and went to send her company a long message about wanting to spend quality time after her marriage. He was terrified, but he knew he had to buy himself time to get out of the country. It was on the 5th day of a honeymoon that a concerned neighbor came to congratulate them on their wedding and also point out that their front lawn was getting a little untidy. The neighbor, who identified herself as Thelma Peters, said that she met stacks of newspapers and other gifts delivered on the front door. But no one had picked them up for days and there was dust settling on them. It was then that she became worried and she got into the apartment but no one was home. When she got to the yard and saw the fresh heap she decided to call the police. Jamal Johnson may have tried his best to hide the evidence but the forensic analysts were able to spot his prints in the house. When the body of Ciara Hart was discovered, they first called Jamal but his line too had been switched off for days. They arrived at his office and his colleagues reported that he hadn't returned to work after his honeymoon. They all assumed he was still having fun with his new wife. Despite being in hiding for the past week, Jamal was finally found and arrested by the local authorities. Jamal had no choice but to present his case in court. The trial was a sensationalized media event, with many people expressing shock and outrage at Jamal's actions. Despite the sympathy that some people felt for him, it was clear that his actions were inexcusable, and he was ultimately convicted of Ciara's murder. And just like a bad dream, Jamal had lost not just his freedom but his whole life and the only woman he loved. The story of Jamal and Ciara serves as a tragic reminder of the devastating consequences of deception and secrets. Jamal's inability to accept himself and his own reality led him down a path of destruction, one that ultimately resulted in the loss of his wife's life and the destruction of his own future. This should be a cold reminder of the role of honesty and openness in relationships. If Jamal had been willing to be truthful with Ciara about his insecurities, perhaps their marriage could have been saved. Instead, his deception and shame led to a tragic outcome that could have been avoided. So many might ask, did Ciara leave her husband on their wedding night because he had a small penis? Or did she leave because he had hidden the truth from her for 2 years? And how could a man like Jamal Johnson, a professor, a man so successful and wealthy, fear shame to the extent of taking the life of the woman he claimed to love? Before the vows are exchanged, one should perhaps ask the other, what are the lies we have told and what secret are we willing to kill for? If you found this story heart-wrenching, then hit the subscribe button for more.